Pushkin stood there several minutes without saying a word. Nor did Chichikov speak, distracted by the man's appearance and by the sight of his room. For a long time he couldn't find words to indicate the reason for his visit. He thought of opening the conversation by telling Plushkin that he had heard so much about his philanthropy and the rare kindness of his heart that he had felt bound to pay him his profound respects. But then he decided that that would be going too far. Glancing once more out of the corner of his eye at all the things in the room, he decided that the words philanthropy and kind-heartedness could be advantageously replaced by thriftiness and order, and rephrased his speech correspondingly to say that having heard so much about Plushkin's thriftiness and his exceptionally orderly way of running his estate, he had felt it incumbent upon him, Chichikov, to meet him and express his admiration for those qualities. Of course, he could have invented some more plausible reason for coming, but he couldn't think of anything better right then. In answer, Plushkin muttered through his lips, he had no teeth, something that couldn't be made out exactly, but of which the general meaning was, "God damn you, you know what you can do with your admiration." But since hospitality is so much in vogue among us that even a miser cannot break its laws, he added somewhat more distinctly, "Please sit down. It's been a long time," he went on, "since I've had any visitors, and I must say I haven't much use for them. It's an obscene custom they've started, visiting one another. It's detrimental to the running of an estate. Yes, and then you've got to give hay to their horses? I've already had my dinner, and my kitchen is in such bad condition, the chimney's practically falling down, that I'd risk starting a fire if I had the stove lighted." "So that's how it is," Chichikov said to himself. "Lucky thing I had a piece of that saddle of mutton and the cheese tart at Sobakevich's. And as luck would have it, there isn't a single wisp of hay in my whole village," Plushkin went on. "But then, really, how can one be expected to save any? I have only a very small piece of land here. The peasants are lazy. They don't like to work, and all they think about is drinking. So if I don't watch out, I'll be forced to go begging in my old age." "But I was told you possessed over 1,000 souls," Chichikov said quietly. "Who told you that?" "You ought to have spat in the eye of the man who goes around saying such things. They say 1,000, but just try and count them. You'll see you won't get very far. In the past 3 years, I've lost a whole drove of peasants through that accursed fever." "You don't say! And many of them died, you say?" Chichikov asked with warm sympathy. "Yes, lots." "How many would you estimate? Could you give me a figure?" 80 souls or so." "Really? Why should I lie, my good man?" "I suppose you're counting from the last census, if I may ask?" "Oh, that wouldn't be half as bad," Plushkin said. "No, since then a whole 120 of them have died." "Really? 120? That many?" Chichikov exclaimed, and even opened his mouth somewhat in wonder. "I'm a bit old to lie, my friend. I'm in my 7th decade, you know." He seemed offended at Chichikov's joyful exclamation, and, indeed, Chichikov realized that such indifference to another's bereavement was indecent. So he sighed sadly and expressed his heartfelt sympathy. "That's all very well, but I can't fold your heartfelt sympathy and put it in my pocket," Plushkin replied. "Just listen to this. There's a captain living near here. Says he's related to me and calls me uncle and kisses me. And when he starts sympathizing, he shouts so loudly that I have to cover my ears. He's all red in the face. Must cling to that bottle of liquor for dear life. But I can just see it. He must have blown all he owned when he was in the army, unless it was one of those little actresses that got her hands on it. So that's where his commiseration comes from, see?" Chichikov exclaimed that his commiseration was radically different from the captain's, and that he was prepared to prove it by deeds instead of words. Whereupon, without further beating about the bush, he expressed his readiness to pay the taxes on the peasants lost in such painful circumstances. The offer seemed to stun Plushkin. His eyes popped out, and for a long time he kept them fixed on Chichikov. Finally he asked, And what about you, sir? Have you served in the army? No, Chichikov answered, rather slyly. But I've been in the civil service. Civil service? Plushkin repeated, and his lips started moving as though he were chewing. But what do you mean by what you said? Wouldn't you lose on it? I'm prepared to take the loss for your sake. Oh, my kind sir, benefactor, Plushkin cried out, without noticing in his joy that snuff, looking like coffee dregs, was rather unaesthetically sticking out of his nose, and that the skirts of his dressing gown had fallen open, exposing a piece of wearing apparel which was quite unsuitable for strange eyes. What a comfort you are to an old man, my kind sir! Blessed be our Lord! Emotion prevented him from continuing, but within a minute this sudden outburst of joy had vanished as unexpectedly as it had appeared on his wooden face, and he resumed his worried expression. He even pulled out his handkerchief, rolled it into a ball, and began rubbing his upper lip with it. Now, if you'll allow me to ask, and I haven't the least wish to offend you, I'd like to know, are you taking it upon yourself to pay the tax for them every year? And do you intend to let me have the money, or will you send it directly to the treasury? Here's what we'll do, Chichikov said. We'll draw up a purchase deed as if they were still alive, and you were selling them to me. A purchase deed, Plushkin said meditatively, his lips starting to masticate again. Well, a purchase deed means expenses. Those clerks have absolutely no scruples nowadays. Before, you could get away with about half a ruble in coppers and perhaps a bag of flour. But today they expect a load of grain and a 10-ruble bill to go with it. Such greed! I really don't understand how the church can remain so indifferent to such goings-on. A sermon on the subject would be quite in order, because whatever you may say, it's hard to resist God's word. I'm sure you'd manage to resist it all right, Chichikov thought, while he declared aloud that, in view of his admiration for Plushkin, he was prepared to foot the expenses incurred in drawing up the purchase deed himself. On hearing this, Plushkin concluded that his visitor was a total idiot, that he had never been a civil servant, as he claimed, but must have served in the army and gone dragging around after actresses. But at the same time, he could not conceal his joy and showered blessings on Chichikov, personally and on his children, without bothering to inquire whether any such existed. Then Plushkin went over to the window, drummed on the glass, and shouted, "Proshka!" A minute later, they heard someone rush into the entrance hall and bustle about, stamping around in his boots. Finally, the door opened, and in came Proshka, a boy of about 13, wearing huge boots, which looked as if they would fall off his feet with every step he took. How Proshka came to have such large boots can be explained immediately. All Plushkin's servants, without exception, had to share one single pair of boots, which was always kept in the hall. When any member of the household was summoned to the master's house, he had first to skip barefoot across the yard, then don the boots in the hall before reporting to the master. Leaving the house, he discarded the boots, depositing them in the hall, and used his natural soles once more. If someone had looked out a window, especially on a fall morning when the frosts begin, he would have seen members of Plushkin's household making leaps that would have been envied by a vigorous dancer on the stage. "Now look at that mug, my good friend," Plushkin said to Chichikov, pointing at Proshka's face. "He's as stupid as a log. But just try and leave anything around and right away he'll steal it. Well, what did you come for? You fool, come on, tell me, what do you want?" He fell silent for a moment, and Proshka responded to his silence with silence. "Go and light the samovar, do you hear? And then take this key, give it to Mavra, and tell her to go to the storeroom and get a slice of the dry cake that Miss Alexandra brought me. I want it served with tea. Wait, where are you off to, you idiot? Oh, you stupid fool. Are your feet on fire? Now listen carefully. The cake must have gone moldy on the outside, so you scrape it off with a knife, but don't throw away the crumbs. Feed them to the chickens. And I warn you, don't you dare enter the storeroom yourself. Stay out or I'll show you. You'll get a flaying that that'll give you an even better appetite than the fine one you've got already. You just try and get into that storeroom. I'll be watching you from this window here." When Proshka had departed, boots and all, Plushkin turned to Chichikov and remarked, "These people can never be trusted." Then he started to cast suspicious glances at Chichikov, too. Such generosity struck him as impossible, and he thought, "Damned if I can figure him out. Maybe he's just showing off. Maybe he's just lying to have something to talk about, like all these good-for-nothing wastrels. And when he's had his tea, he'll leave me cold." And so, as a precaution, and also to test his visitor, he said that it might be a good idea to draw up the purchase deed without delay, for there was nothing certain where a human being is concerned. He may be alive today, and God knows what tomorrow. Chichikov said he was prepared to draft the deed that very instant, and asked only for a list of the peasants' names. Plushkin was reassured. He stood there, obviously contemplating the next step. Finally, he took the keys, walked over to the cupboard, unlocked it, and fumbled among the glasses and cups for a long while. Then he said, "Well, I can't find it. There should be a drop of fine liqueur in here unless they've drunk it. They're such thieves. But wait, I think I've got it." Chichikov saw he was holding a flask, dressed in a thick layer of dust, like a woolen sweater. "Goes back to the time of my late wife. She made it herself," Plushkin went on, "and my useless housekeeper failed to attend to it. Didn't even put a stopper in it, the slut. Bugs and all sorts of filth found their way into it, but I managed to fish them out, and it's quite clear now. Allow me to pour you a little glass." But Chichikov declined, assuring his host that he had eaten and drunk just before he had arrived. "So you've eaten and drunk already?" Plushkin said. "Yes, there's no doubt about it. One can always tell a man of good breeding. He's not hungry even when he hasn't eaten. While some small-time thief, you can feed him as much as you wish. Take that captain. He just comes over and right away he starts, 'Uncle,' he says, 'let's have something to eat, uncle.' And I'm no more his uncle than he's my grandpa. Probably he's got nothing to eat at home, so he just goes around, 'Ah, yes, you'd like a list of those parasites. I'll give it to you right away. I copied their names out on a special scrap of paper to have them crossed off at the next census.'" Plushkin donned his glasses and began to rummage among his papers, untying all sorts of bundles. He showered his guest with such a cloud of dust that the latter sneezed. Finally, he pulled out a scrap of paper covered with scribblings. The names of peasants were clustered on it like flies. There were Peramons, Pimens, and Pentelmons, and even a Gregory Never-Get-There. All told, there were a few more than 120 of them. On seeing such a large number, Chichikov smiled. Putting the paper in his pocket, he told Plushkin that, in order to have the deed legalized, he'd have to come into town. "Go to town? How can I? Who'd look after the house? Don't you realize that my people are all thieves and robbers? They'd take everything, and I wouldn't even have a place left to hang my coat. But don't you have some acquaintance? Where would I find one? Everyone I used to know has either died or lost touch with me, but wait a minute, my friend. I can surely say I know the president of the district court. He even used to come and visit me in the old days. We went to school together, climbed over fences together. Of course, I know him well. Shall I write to him?" "Yes, certainly, write to him." "Certainly I know him. He's a school friend of mine." And suddenly a slight beam of warmth passed over that wooden face, expressing not an emotion, but the reflection of an emotion. It was like the unexpected reappearance of a drowning man on the surface, which provokes a joyful outcry among those crowded along the bank. But it is in vain that his brothers and sisters throw him a rope and wait for his back or his tired arms to reappear. They have seen the last of him. There's nothing more, and the smooth, unbroken surface of the water seems more sinister than ever. It was the same with Plushkin's face. When the feeling that had broken the surface for a second had gone, It seemed even harder and duller than before. "There was a sheet of clean paper on the table, and I don't know what's happened to it," he said. "My people are so untrustworthy." He started searching through all the things on the table. Then he looked under it and finally called out, "Mavra! Mavra!" A woman appeared. She was carrying a plate with a piece of stale cake on it, whereupon the following conversation took place between the two of them. "What have you done with the sheet of paper, you thief?" "I swear I haven't seen any paper, master, except the little scrap you used to cover the glass." "Is that so? But I can tell you've taken it by your eyes." "But what would I do with it, sir? You know I can't read or write." "You took it over to the sacristan? He can write, so you gave it to him." "But master, if the sacristan wanted paper, he could get some himself. He doesn't need your bit." "You just wait. On the day of judgment, the devils will roast you on their forks for this. Just mark my words." "But why should they roast me, since I haven't touched your paper? I may have other feminine weaknesses, but I've never been accused of stealing yet." "And I tell you, they'll roast you. They'll say, 'That's for you, you thief, for having cheated your master.' Yes, they'll roast you on red-hot coals." "But I'll tell them that there's no reason. I never took it." "Oh, look, here's your paper, right on the table. You're always blaming people for nothing, sir." Plushkin saw the sheet. For a moment he stopped, masticated, moving his lips, and then said, "You're too touchy. No need to get so excited. I say one word to her, and she gives me back a dozen. You'd better go and get me a light for the sealing wax. Wait! Remember, I don't want you to light a candle for it. Candles melt, and it's pure waste. You'd better bring me a stick from the fire." Mavra left. Plushkin sat down in his chair and took a quill in his hand. But then he remained there, turning the sheet of paper this way and that for a long time. He was wondering whether he couldn't tear off a piece of it to save. When he was finally convinced that it was impossible, he dipped the quill into a pot containing some moldy fluid and several flies, and started to write. His writing looked very much like musical notes. From time to time, he had to control the impetuosity of his hand in order to keep the letters and the lines close together, and he kept looking ruefully at the white spaces that could still be detected between them. Can a man sink to such depths of pettiness, stinginess, and vileness? Can he really change so much? Can it be so? Everything is possible when it comes to what may happen to a man. The fiery youth of today would start back in horror if he could be shown his own portrait in old age. So hold on to the human emotions of the gentle years of youth. Throughout the journey into grim manhood, hold on to them. For if you let them go, you will never retrieve them later. Old age looms ahead, forbidding and terrifying, and it will never give anything back to you. The grave is more charitable. It, at least, bears the inscription, "A man is buried here." But there's nothing to read in the cold, unfeeling features of inhuman senility.